I don't know if I should call it a dumpster fire, but currently the Raiders are a bit of a mess, shall we say? Vinny Bonsignore, I'll add the pronunciation. He's all over this Davante Adams, Antonio Pierce saga. Vinny, your life kind of picked up this week just a little bit, huh?
Yeah, just a little bit. It feels pretty normal around these parts that something is going to occur at some point in the season when it relates to the Raiders that are going to have you invited onto podcasts like this
Yeah.
across the country. So we're kind of used to it. I wouldn't necessarily call it a dumpster fire, but there's definitely some flames emanating from Henderson, Nevada, right about now, and I do think the Raiders believe they're going to be able to put it out. I don't think Davante Adams is ever going to play another game with the Raiders, but part of putting it out would be moving on from Davante Adams.
So let's back up here a little bit. Adams, when he came to the Raiders, he was excited to play with Carr, obviously. They move on from Carr, then it's Garoppolo. Now it's the Minshew / maybe Aiden O'Connell show. How much has the quarterback issue, worn on Adams?
Yeah, and it's probably the biggest part of all of this. He came to the Raiders, and I wouldn't necessarily say the only reason he came to the Raiders was Derek Carr. Obviously, it helped. They're good friends. They played together at Fresno State. When all that happened with Derek Carr, with the Raiders moving on from Derek Carr, I think Davante understood and was willing to give it time to see, okay, well, what's it going to look like without Derek Carr, who that quarterback is going to be. And I think he gave it an honest effort to make it work. I know he loves being in Las Vegas. He loves being a Raider. It's the team that he grew up rooting for. He's in close proximity to all his family, and they're based up in the Bay Area that make the trip every week when the Raiders are at home to watch him play. So all of that is good, and he wanted it to work. But eventually, as time went on, you start looking at the record. I think they're 15-22 with him on the field. The numbers have gone down. They've circled through some various different quarterbacks, and it just really isn't working. And I know everyone wants to look for a bad guy in all of this, and maybe at some point on a podcast somewhere down the road, all of the details will kind of come out on how both the Raiders and Davante sort of arrived at this moment. But I think if you take a step back and look at it from his perspective and look at it from the Raiders' perspective, where they are, while it wasn't necessarily inevitable, it's understandable. Davante Adams is 32 years old. He's got less years than more, fewer years than more left in his career. He wants to maximize whatever time he has remaining, and it really wasn't working in that regard here with the Raiders. The Raiders are looking at a 32-year-old wide receiver who's really in the last year of his contract. No more guaranteed money on the deal after this year. And they're not winning with him. Maybe from their perspective, it's best to move on, get something for him, and expedite whatever the rebuild might be or the tinkering to get better, chasing a quarterback. And from his perspective, maybe he gets to find a landing spot, and probably will. That puts him closer to the objectives that he wants at this stage of his career, and that's to win football games and playing important football games. Long-winded answer, I know, but that's kind of where it all is. And again, everyone wants to find the bad guy in all this. Maybe there is a bad guy, but I think it's also understandable from both sides of why it's gotten to this point now.
So the Panthers game a couple weeks ago seemed like maybe a tipping point because back in August, I had hosted The Herd and Deshaun Jackson came on, and Deshaun Jackson's like, yeah, Davante Adams is not happy in Vegas. And like a week later, they ask Adams, and he's like, I've barely talked to Deshaun Jackson in my life. I put it on my kids. I'm not unhappy. And then here it is, like 3 games into the season, this Panthers game happens, and Pierce calls out some guys. It's still unclear who was making business decisions, but a video of Adams kind of throwing his hands up, unhappy, emerged. And I don't know. What would you say that game was the tipping point?
I would say that, yeah. Well, first of all, really quick, just to kind of clarify, because I was there amongst that group that Davante was talking about Deshaun Jackson. I don't think he ever said, I'm not unhappy. I think what he said was, I haven't talked to Davante Adams in, maybe a couple of times in my life, and I've never talked about my feelings with him. The only person that I ever really talked to about those things are my wife, and she's not leaking anything. So, and I'm not saying that to correct you or anything like that, but
no, that's a good call.
I think it is. There is a distinction that needs to be made. He stopped short of telling us where his head was at that point. Now, consistently, Davante has said, uh, if I wanted out, I would have made that quite. If I wanted out, I'd be out. So
Okay.
that doesn't say that he was. That doesn't address whether he's happy or he's not happy. And I could say this. I feel comfortable in my reporting that he was monitoring the situation and reserving the right to make the decision that he ultimately made when he felt it needed to be made on how much longer do I give this versus when do I start saying, look, maybe a better situation for both of us is what's needed. So just to kind of get that out there. But to your question about the tipping point, probably, I think that I think how that game went down and some of the things that were said afterwards, and maybe that was the bulb that went off with Davante of, am I really going to get where I need to get to where I want to get to at this stage of my career? Here in Las Vegas with the Raiders. And that's not to say that he's been running from the situation. He's truly wanted it to work and has wanted to be part of or a focal point of the turnaround. The Raiders are a legacy franchise that have, for the most part, fallen on hard times. He would have been thrilled to be part of the turnaround that restored this iconic franchise back to its rightful place, if you want to call it that. But eventually there's an expiration date on how much longer do I give this, because I have my own needs to address as well. And I think that there was probably a little bit of a tipping point there. And some of the things that were said, I can't rule out with the business decisions. Comment by Antonio Pierce how that quite landed with Davante. Maybe it rubbed him the wrong way. Maybe he just didn't see the leadership that he wanted to see from this head coach or a path to where he wanted to be. So yeah, I would imagine that the Carolina Panther game played some role in all of this, being expedited the way it has over the last couple of days.
All right, let's spin this forward. I don't know. Adams is obviously going to have suitors, like you said. He's kind of on what the NBA folks would call like an expiring contract since he's got nothing, no money going forward. I would assume at least a dozen teams would be interested. Let's just start with the obvious one, the Kansas City Chiefs. A lot of people say there's no way they trade him in the division. I don't know if they've got the best offer. Isn't it in the Raiders' best interest to simply, I don't know, get the most you can? Now, maybe you want to hold off on that deal so Adams doesn't torch you in the division twice this year. But where are you on the Chiefs and Raiders making a deal happen? Have they historically done trades?
I would imagine. I'm trying to at least in the time that I've been here, no.
Okay.
But I'd have to look back to see if they. I think there has been, but we probably have to go way back to along those lines. But you're right. If it's the decidedly best offer, like if it's just not even close, like if they've blown everyone out of the water, you have to, as an organization, look at, first of all, he's probably would just be a rental for the Chiefs next year, and maybe they sign him to a restructure the last couple of years that are on his contract on non-guaranteed money to maybe put some guaranteed money in his wallet and maybe get another year out of him next year, but really be able to walk away after that when he's when he would be approaching 34 years old. So
Yeah.
as the Raiders, you have to say, okay, how painful would that year, these next 2 years be versus if we play our cards right and utilize whatever assets we get back from the Kansas City Chiefs to help us moving forward.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe at some point we get the last laugh out of all of that, so that has to be considered. And I don't think you rule it out whatsoever. If that is the best offer and it's decidedly so, you owe it to yourself and as an organization to make that move. And then you just have to kind of explain it to your fan base for, why we did what we did. Well, these are the reasons why we did what we did, and this was the best offer on the table, and we owe it to ourselves as an organization to take advantage of what we believe was the best offer.
Yeah, I'm curious. Like, okay, fine, maybe the Chiefs, they don't do a deal with him, but there's a lot of teams in the AFC, Vinny. I mean, the Buffalo Bills could use a receiver. We just saw Houston spend on Diggs, and with the quarterback on the rookie deal, I wonder if other teams look around and say, "Hey, wait a minute, we got a quarterback on the cheap." I don't know, Indianapolis, do they make a play, or does Adams have some say in saying, "I'm not going to the Colts. Sorry, I would rather play for the Saints and my buddy Derek Carr." Do you? I don't know how that would work with the Raiders. They want to do him right, obviously, but does he have the power to make any statement like that?
Um, I don't know necessarily the power, but I think he's got enough goodwill within the organization and the decision makers that they're not going to do him wrong. I don't believe so. Wherever he ends up, I'd be shocked if it wasn't a place that he signed off on as well. And there's probably more of the yes than the no's right now.
Yeah.
And let's be honest, nobody's dealing for Davante Adams if they're kind of a middling team right now. You know, this would be the guy that gets you over the top, i.e., the Buffalo Bills, the Kansas City Chiefs. You know that would obviously help them. The New York Jets, you know, especially in a wide open AFC. I think right now the Raiders would be right on the cusp of making the playoffs. I know it's only 4 games, but this is probably going to stay this way for a long time this season. There's so much parity. There's
Yeah.
not much differentiating. You know, 1 through 6 really, except for maybe the Kansas City Chiefs, and then 2 through 7 in this conference are pretty darn close right now. And the Raiders honestly are right in the thick of things, but so are a lot of other teams
Yeah.
that could probably make a compelling case. But I'd say Buffalo really stands out, and obviously the Jets. For you got to look at it this from a Jets perspective. Can they afford to let him really go anywhere else? And that works to the Raiders' favor, because how can the Jets say, how can the Jets let him go to Buffalo, let's say,
Oh,
right?
jeez.
When you know that he probably would love to be with Aaron Rodgers, and Aaron Rodgers wants him. I'm sure Aaron has already knocked on Joe Douglas's office door to make that case, which he's probably done over and over and over again for the last year or so anyway. I don't know that the Jets could afford to let that happen from their fan base, from their star quarterback, the window, the coach, and the general manager. I mean, this probably gives them the best chance to self preserve, you know, to keep their jobs basically.
Yeah.
So for a lot of reasons, the Jets are at the top of the list, and I'm sure the Raiders are going to try to take advantage of that.
So yeah, that's the problem, Vinny. As a Jets fan for almost all my life, I know that they always get used, right? You need leverage. Hey, just mention the Jets, right? They're
Right.
desperate. They're a sad sack franchise. And I would, only thing I would change about what you said is Aaron Rodgers wouldn't go to Joe Douglas. He'd just go to Woody Johnson. Remember,
That's
Woody
true.
Johnson jumped on a plane and flew out to recruit him. So he
Right.
just goes to Woody. Hey, Woody, listen, the GM and the coach are going to be fired anyway if this doesn't work, right? They're
Right.
probably toast if you don't make the playoffs. So I don't know why but they haven't brought on Hassan Reddick yet. They're like, oh, we're haggling over money. Who cares about money? The GM's going to be gone anyway. It's not your money. And then
Right.
now draft picks, it's like, listen, man, go get me Davante Adams. Just go get him. A
Right.
second and a fifth. Is that outlandish?
No, I don't think it would be actually, and again, that works right to the Raiders' favor if there's high
Yeah.
motivation in New York to make sure that he goes right to New York and not anywhere else. And so if you're the Raiders, you're like, well, I've got this from A, B, and C teams A, B, and C. Are you really going to let that happen, or are you going to you're going to better the offer? And so I don't know. I'm not even though I live in Las Vegas, I'm not a gambling person, but it's hard for me to sit here and think that a deal would happen without the Jets playing a prominent role, whether they're just edged out or they're the team that makes the most compelling offer because he probably needs to be there for a lot of different reasons and a lot of different motivations, whether you're Aaron Rodgers or Joe Douglas or Robert Saleh. There's a lot of motivation there to improve that offense. In a league that's struggling to score points and in a conference that's so bunched up, he could be the difference for the Raiders, because that he and Aaron Rodgers are going to just seamlessly transition together. That's a model that has worked to the highest of levels, and I don't think that it would take them long at all to recapture that magic.
So you said Bay Area earlier with Davante and how his family comes down from the Bay Area to go to his games, and it just dawned upon me. So the San Francisco 49ers, Vinny, went and spent a lot of money on a guy that they haggled with all summer, and that's Brandon Ayuk, and he's been a bit of a disappointment. Is there a world where the Raiders say, shucks, we'll take Brandon Ayuk. We could use a receiver. I mean, I like Jacoby Myers. He looks good, and Tucker looks good. I got him on my fantasy team. But if we can get Ayuk and a draft pick for Davante, why don't we do that? We're not paying our quarterback anything. Is that just too crazy, two receivers swapping? What's your thoughts?
I don't think so. And from the Raiders, I would be highly interested in that, because the one thing that Brandon Ayuk represents is somebody that has more years left on his career. I know that it's been a little bit of a shaky start, but there's a proven track record there with Brandon Ayuk, and you
Certainly.
figure that that'll get sorted out. He represents longevity in terms of the contract. Again, Davante is really going into the last year of his deal, and there's no chance that he would, no matter what happened right now, no matter what has happened over the last couple of days, there is no chance that he was going to play for the Raiders on the number that he's on the books for next year, even though it's, books, and I put that in quotation marks.
Yeah.
But there was no way he was going to play for $36 million next year. That just wasn't happening. So, I could imagine that the Raiders would probably be interested in that if that offer was true. And the 49ers were interested in Davante Adams during the offseason. So it's not something that, it would be so you could definitely imagine that could be circled back to or revisited at some point.
Yeah. So, because that's interesting. It allows them to save some money because they got to pay Purdy. And it lets you give Pearsall, the kid who got shot, he gets a little more time to ramp up. And you're not committed long-term to Adams. You just want the Super Bowl this year. Without McCaffrey, I don't know. Where are you on the Niners, by the way? I know you don't cover them like you do the Raiders, but I'm just curious on your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, when healthy and they know how to put it all together so that they're going to be there at the end of the season. I'm high on Purdy. I think he's criminally underrated in some quarters. So, and the thing with, if you're the Niners and if you do make that trade, you could easily turn those last 2 years of his contract into maybe 2 years with $36 million guaranteed, and maybe half of the salary for the 2026 season. Maybe you only guarantee half of that. So it's really kind of a 1 year deal next. I would imagine they would want him for the rest of this year and next year, and that ensures that. And then you can either trade him the following year when only half of that salary is guaranteed, or easier walk away from him. So if I'm the Niners and I do that, I'd at least want to make sure that he's going to be here for more than just the rest of the season, even if it's just the 2025 season as well. And then you'll play 2026 by ear.
And we could wrap up with this, Vinny. So you were in the locker room talking to all the players, coaches. I'm just curious. They have a trip to Denver this week. Denver's defense has been lights out for 2 weeks in a row. What's like the mindset of the Raiders heading into this game? Is it like, damn, we're trading our best player? Is it dysfunction? Or can Pierce, who's kind of a rally around the team guy, can he get the troops up to speed for a big game this week, as he did against the Browns? Remember, they were down 10-0 and stormed back to win it. Do you think they could pull off some magic here, or is it kind of a somber mood with Adams saying he wants out?
Yeah, not a somber mood. Obviously they like Davante. One thing about professional sports, I think know this, guys compartmentalize pretty easily. And everyone's on their own kind of journey anyway. And not to say that they're being selfish or anything like that. They care for Davante. He's hugely popular in this locker room. But you also understand there's a business side. And for every, you look at that wide receiver room and all of a sudden there's opportunities for younger players. And they showed on Sunday against the Browns, a couple of those young players, that they were ready for that challenge. So, no, I wouldn't say somber. And I do think that what happened against the Browns, it kind of gave the Raiders and a very young locker room a chance to kind of see what life was like without Davante. I don't think anyone was anticipating that it might be a long-term life without him, or that his departure was going to be imminent. But at the very least, they saw what life looked like without him, and it wasn't that bad, to be honest with you. Actually, the offense was pretty fluid on Sunday. And, when you have a big focal point like Davante, and we saw this with, I was saying this on the radio show that I have. John Morant a couple of years ago got injured, and the Memphis Grizzlies actually played better without him. That's not right to say that they were a better team without him, but it freed other players up, and you didn't feel obligated to get him the touches that he obviously deserves, and be a dominant force, the ball handling, the shooting, and all that. And that's kind of what, whether the quarterback or the coach wants to truly address this. But every game that you play with a Davante Adams, and that's been the case here, that 17 needs to get 13, targets, 15 targets. And you just go into every game almost subconsciously knowing that. And so from a play calling standpoint to a quarterbacking standpoint, that's on your mind. Well, that wasn't on Gardner Minshew's mind on Sunday, and neither was it on Luke Getsy's mind on Sunday. And you saw the ball just gets spread around to a whole bunch of players, and it happened organically. And not to say that they're better without him, but there's certain positives to it as well. So
I
maybe
like that.
that's what they saw on Sunday, kind of gave them the confidence that, okay, if we're to trade him, life doesn't have to be dire straits.
That's great stuff. Vinny Bonsignore covers the Raiders for the Review Journal. He's all over the radio. He's everywhere. Vinny, great stuff. Thanks a lot. And, good luck keeping your phone on for the next 2 weeks.
I appreciate